And so, who's ready to visualize business like you've never done before? That is the question. Our next speaker, Mike Pell, is an envisioneer and leads the Microsoft Garage in New York City. He is recognized as a world-class designer and industry thought leader in next-gen visualization. In his new interactive book, Visualizing Business, Pell illustrates how we can see the invisible workings and flows of global enterprises in an entirely new light. I bring to the stage Mike Pell.
Thank you. Wow, you stayed. You stayed, thank you. For everybody here, everybody remotely, my name is Mike Pell. I'm from the future. And if you're here in this session, you want to change the world as much as I do. And we're going to start by visualizing business in a completely different way. Everybody here knows that XR can unlock a lot of things that we know to be invisible. They're there. We just can't see them. And so in this session, we're going to go through the most important part of all of this, which is why people need to be at the center of this. Charts lie, graphs obscure, and data never tells the story. That's the sad state of affairs where our story begins. But we're going to change that. We have the power to change it, we know how to do it, and together, with my knowledge from the future, we're going to do it. If there's nothing else that you remember about this entire talk, please remember this. Data sets are not the key to visualizing business. They never were, and they never will be. People are the key. It's what's in your brains, it's what's in your heart, it's what's in your soul that helps people to understand what's really happening. Visualizing business is really the way that we think about how everything works, interconnects, and relates to each other. But let's go back. We have to start at the beginning. Forever, business has been about when people look at how their businesses operate, the numbers, how things flow, they form mental models. We look at a bunch of numbers, but what's in our heads is what really matters. These charts and graphs and things that we've done forever have never changed. I mean, for the most part, these are from the 19th century. We've never changed the way that we depict how our businesses work. It's fine, these work, but we know the reason you're sitting here is that you know that we can do better, and we will. We're not going to do better by introducing gradients, using better typography, having things matchy-matchy. That's not the way forward. That's not what XR brings to the party. That's not what artificial intelligence can do for us. One day, somebody got the bright idea that they could go like that, and it would be better. Is that better? No, maybe. I kind of like it. I like colored pencils. I think they're kind of cool. But is that how you visualize the results of your business? Is that really the best way to do it? Maybe. There's a compelling argument for that. Is that the best way to visualize how your business works? Your results? Your impact in the world? No. Please, as a favor to me, please don't ever do that. Don't ever bring charts and graphs and extrude them and plop them into the world and think that you're doing somebody a favor. Don't drag the past into the future. How about this? Should we put a whole bunch of phone screens in front of you when you're in VR with all kinds of data? Is that helping? No. Please don't do that either. At the heart of all of this is real data. It's numbers. But when we as humans look at these, we make sense out of it very, very quickly. The way to do that is not to build a gigantic network graph with every single piece of data that you've ever collected. Is this helpful? Of course not. Can't make sense out of it. Nothing. How about this? How about making it better looking? That's better, right? No. We need to move forward, and we will, because you're here, you care, the people watching remotely, the people here, you know that the way forward is to take something that we know to be true and make it real enough for people to see, experience together, and share. So in this book that I'm just about to finish and introduce at South by Southwest this year, Visualizing Business, I detail some of the things that we will do together to help business be able to finally depict the way that it really works. At the heart of all of this are 5 things. Anything that we create together is going to lead with clarity. It's always going to be in motion. And then for me, probably one of the most important things is it's going to push the immersive, really push it. And we're going to get into where that is. It's going to use scale. And finally, we're going to use cinematic techniques to help tell the story. But first, leading with clarity. There's so much going on all around us in every different media type you can imagine. Sound, video, text, things that you can feel. And so how do we help people to really see what's happening inside of our businesses? It's not to, again, plot every single piece of data in a more interesting and beautiful way. Okay, you could argue that maybe this is helping me to understand a little bit more, but it's not really. When we start to look at our data in this way, the only thing that truly matters, as far as I'm concerned, is that you can bring insight. You can go from the raw data. You can start from something that we know to be true, all the data we've collected about the way our business operates, our sales, our customer connections. But please, I ask all the data, people who work in data science, please come back with the insight. You know what it is. You don't need to be objective all the time. Help people to understand the insight. That's one of the most key things. We've seen this forever, right? In computer operating systems, we would always just sort of put a bunch of data in front of you and have you figure it out. With machine learning, artificial intelligence, super easy to just tell me. You're going to be out of space in a few days instead of having me figure it out. It's the same principle. In business, forever and ever and ever, we put charts and graphs in front of people and had them try to figure it out. Don't need to do that. That's not how we're going to visualize business going forward. So just tell me. This is the key principle that you're going to find that's going to help you the most. Just be super direct. Be clear. Don't have people figure things out because you want to stay objective. You can be perfectly objective and still point out the important things about your data. For me, I like things, I'm a designer. I like things to be beautiful. I like them to be beautifully clear more. And the way you do that is through insight. Second principle, things will always be in motion. Why? Because business is always in motion. It's chaotic. It's ever changing. The nature of business has always and forever been in motion. Yet, for a century or more, we have depicted business as being static slices, charts and graphs that don't move, that don't have any life, that don't let me see how the connections are moving, how they're really interacting with each other. When we look at things, as far as just a few years ago, we could form a model of how our businesses worked very, very quickly because we're used to sort of forming that chart or that graph that we're used to seeing. In some cases, we even tried to sort of animate things like, hey, if I click on this next year, look, it animates, right? Kind of has motion. No. The kind of motion that we're talking about is this. This is one of the best reels that I've seen for a long time that helps people to understand what I'm talking about when I say you will see your business in motion. We'll see the flow of things. How do people interconnect? How places interconnect? The path through things. Over time, we can stop it, we can fast forward it, we can rewind it, we can project, we can play what if. But it's in motion, just like real life. Every single business, whether it's the way that we treat our academic institutions as business, or our commerce sites, or even retailers, every single business that we know of is constantly in motion. And yet, we never depict it that way. That's going to change. We're going to do that together. The best example that I can think of, the easiest example I can think of to sort of convey how you could think about this is imagine your business model as an engine animation, right? I'm sure you've always seen these. For the purposes of this talk, I'm not going to show you this whole animation, but just imagine how an engine works, right? There's gasoline and oil flowing through it, pistons are going up and down. Think about your business model in the very same way. That's the easiest example. There's other examples that are really forward-looking. This is a piece of work that's really brilliant called the halo. You may think that this is an odd-looking creature. This might be the pie chart of the future. The reason for that is that it's been envisioned to help convey information in a very dynamic way, as multiple, I would say, dimensions that can be altered. But from the very, very beginning, it was designed to play what if, do projection, and to be able to help us move forward. Here are just a few of the dimensions that you can play around with these. So again, this may not be right for what you're doing right now, but it clearly shows you where we're going. Motion is all about understanding, right? It helps us to understand. I'm not talking about transitional, gratuitous things in PowerPoint that go from one state to another. That's garbage. It's meaningless. What I'm talking about is actually seeing how things flow through your business. How do the people flow? How does the money flow? Where's the supply chain? What happens when we communicate or don't communicate? That's what unlocks true understanding for us. Immersion is really the most critical part to understand what we need to do. If any of you have ever seen any of my talks at AWEs in the past, you've seen this motion clip where we show people that are completely immersed in information. One of the more interesting aspects of that is just imagine your own data being displayed in your own data center, being able to walk among it, being able to recognize things that you only saw as numbers before, but now they're structure. They look real enough to be able to dig into, to pull out like a drawer, to experiment with like Legos. It's the immersion that creates the connection. It's an emotional thing. And finally, scale. This is one of my favorite aspects of all of this. When you walk around, let's say in New York City or any large metropolitan area and you look up, the skyscrapers have an enormous scale as compared to us. It helps us as people to understand our place in the world. How big are we compared to other things? When I look up, I see data. Just imagine that everything around us, I'm not talking about the matrix, but everything around us could be depicted as data. The systems we use, the people we talk to, the connections, the networks, the processes. That data will become real and visible, and we can interact with it. You could stand next to all of this data, as I've experimented with. It's incredible when you can be among your own pieces of data that you recognize. The scale helps to unlock something in our brains, helps us make the connection and comparison. This kind of thing will be commonplace using XR technologies. Like, you all know this to be true. We do this all the time, but in different aspects. In gaming, in other types of immersive experiences, location-based entertainment. But now it's about business. It's about getting serious and getting inside your data and inside your business. Going forward, I can't imagine that we'll ever not want to be able to do this. You heard the expression inside the numbers. Well, this is really inside the numbers. Scale is never about the number. Humans can't understand what 1,000 is, really. If you say to somebody, I've got 1,000 books for you, how big is that really? Like, how many boxes? How much space does that take up? We have no idea. And now say billion or trillion, boggling. But if you look at this, if you look at a mountain, you look at a skyscraper, you look at something much larger than yourself, you have a sense of scale. We're going to use that as one of the most creative tools in our arsenal to be able to help people visualize their business, their data, and the impact. And finally, one of the most important things that I've tried to do is introduce the notion of being cinematic. You hear a lot about data storytelling. Data storytelling is a fairy tale. But filmmakers have known how to make emotional connections with us forever. From the very earliest films you've seen, some of the things that you remember are those moments that are just burned into your brain. When you look at this image, right, of a, sort of a moonscape, right, urban city. This is actually data. It's not a photograph. It's not a painting. This is the same data that I showed you before, but it's just rendered a little bit differently to look more cinematic. Helps us make a connection, helps to paint a picture, helps to make an emotional connection. Same thing with this. It looks like you're crossing over the bridge, but it's your data. It's a place. It's something that we can experience together. We don't need to do this, you may say. Well, I would disagree. We do need to get better. We can't use flying charts and graphs and call them data storytelling. That's a bunch of nonsense. Look at film. Look at the craft of being able to tell stories, through the cinema. That's what we need to do to be able to really get across to people how to visualize their businesses. So what's next is data's among us. This may look like art to you. To me, it looks like the next generation of data. The data that is powering your business, the data that will be understood. And one of the most beautiful things I've seen recently is this piece, which looks exactly to me like the future of your business. So with that, I've detailed how you can get to this future in this book, Visualizing Business. And with that, happy to take some questions from the audience. Only one brave person. Go ahead. I can take it.
So first off, this looks amazing. It's clearly a better way to visualize data. I wonder though about the practical aspects of it. Like when you're, if you just have a pie chart, that's obviously super easy and quick to make, right? Whereas doing something as extravagant as this, despite it being beautiful and probably giving that emotional impact, you say, it seems like it would take a long time to make. How do you address that and sort of make it practical?
So first of all, thank you. It's a great question. So just to try to paraphrase it if I can, why not just use a pie chart instead of making like a mini documentary, or like a Netflix film? There's nothing wrong with pie charts. There's nothing wrong with line graphs. There's nothing wrong with scatter plots. There's nothing wrong with any of them. But there's a better way to depict the complexity, the motion, and the real impact in your business. Those charts and graphs are perfect for what they're trying to depict, a slice in time. And, I think that people are used to them and they're fine. But if you're really trying to make a connection, if you're trying to tell a story, meaning you need people to understand the moving parts, we have to move past those. There's just no other way to do it. Right? We're never going to get there by animating traditional charts. Does that help?
Just one follow-up.
Yeah, please.
One follow-up is, instead, do you have any tools to do this effectively? Or do you just kind of have to make it all in Unity or so on?
Again, fantastic question. Are there tools to do this? There are the beginnings of the tools to do this, but they're not in our realm, right? They're not in the realm of the XR world. They're in things like Adobe Creative Suite, where machine learning and artificial intelligence are helping to do very manual jobs for us. Those will come to our tools. Like you look at Unity, you look at Unreal, you look at some of the, Blender, like some of the things that we use now. Those will start to infuse the same types of artificial intelligence and machine learning techniques that have been employed in things like the Adobe Creative Suite to automate very manual processes. That will help us to get to some of this more automatically.
Hey, Mike. Another
yes.
question over here.
No, you were.
Sorry.
Thanks. So if I think about data visualization, I had to define data visualization. I would define it as quantifying real-world things and in a symbolic way that we can use to communicate and broadly categorize. And I think the premise of what you're presenting is a thing is a thing is a thing, and like present each thing as it exists in the real world. I'm trying to make the connection, I guess maybe more so with the example you made with network graphs. That you don't want to see a big network graph. You don't want to see the complexity of the information, but yet I don't know how else you would show representations of people and groups of people and parent nodes and children nodes. So I don't know if you can speak more towards, how do you make those connections? Because even in the analogy you were giving with the buildings, that's still making an analogy, right? You're making a symbolic analogy compared to a real thing. So it feels like you're still making the same sort of jump that a pie chart does or whatever it does, but it's in a more realistic sense. But I don't know if everything really fits into those categories.
Right.
So yeah, thanks.
Perfect. On that topic, so I've written about this and definitely go into it more in the new book that's coming out. I believe that there's a better representation for most things that we depict generally as charts and graphs and other things, right? Like you can take any type of data, whether it's financial for like selling sneakers or for selling cars or buildings, doesn't matter. It's all depicted as the same graph. I feel that there is a native form to things that help to make that connection that you just talked about, but we don't use them right now. And so that's part of the frontier. That's what we have to explore and figure out together is what is that better symbolic representation of things that we immediately connect and sort of embrace as being a better representation of something. And that's the game, right? We don't know what those are. We have to go out and discover those ourselves, but I can guarantee you they are not pouring everything in the world into charts and graphs. They are not. There's a better representation for everything. Oh, yeah.
Following from that, I've just come from a talk with Steve Sullivan, your Microsoft colleague from the Volumetric Chapter Studios, and I'm wondering, is there a movement that you can see towards using that technology to capture avatars that are more realistic and also environments and tools, and kind of bridge that gap also to enable people to use that without coding things and creating them from scratch? I mean, is there, what role does volumetric have in that universe of yours? And do you see companies like Microsoft investing on that now that they're looking into building a business metaverse?
So Microsoft certainly has been investing in spatial, mixed reality, volumetric things. And the things that you're referencing, I believe having some reference, some touch point to the real world is also key to unlocking these new shapes, right? These new ways of depicting things. They don't have to be a one-to-one analog. Like you could pull out your phone and use like photogrammetry and like scan the room and get that's fine. And maybe that's a great start, but it can't be the only thing that we use. There has to be sort of intelligence behind it to actually help you make the connection through sound, through the way that we animate things to sort of show you, how they progressed. So I think that the investments that many high-tech companies are making in being able to get the spatial representations of things are only going to add to our understanding of data as it's represented in the real world, right? So there are many examples we can go into, but thank you for asking the question because it is important. This isn't magic, right? This is science, right? Like there's art in the representation, like in how you can sort of make sense of something. Personally, I believe that that's the artful part of this, right? Is the human emotional connection, but the science part is help turning our environment, the things that we know to be true, into something that you recognize right away and can do something about.
Hey Mike, what's going on? So we talk about data and the visualization of it, and you talked about the tools that are just being developed now. I guess if you look at something like Canva, for example, how far away are we and what do we need to make something like Canva with the templates required for doing this at scale?
Wow. So as far as tools, I wrote about this extensively in my last book. The tools we have are primitive, right? Absolutely primitive, but they're getting better every day, right? We are learning how to inject AI and machine learning and other things like reinforcement learning that help take something that's highly manual and not completely automate it, but give us a head start, give us that help. Like the Creative Suite is a great example of that. You can play around with, okay, I want to change the background on this photo. It'll sort of give you that head start. You're probably not going to stop with exactly what it did the first time, but they found a way forward. And so in the same way, business tools, whether they're like anything that you can bring up, will start to use those same techniques, and it's going to accelerate very, very quickly. So I would say this time next year, you will start seeing the beginnings of tools. Like right now, look at Microsoft Photoshop, or excuse me, Microsoft PowerPoint, right? Or look at Photoshop. They can give you things that were so manually intensive just a few months ago. It was almost too hard for people to do. And we came so far, so fast, with just a little bit of injection of that. So I think you're going to be very surprised with our current tool sets advancing.
Luke Borrell, MIT Reality Hack. And I really like this presentation because it looks like mathematics as a universal language, which is clear, and that's true, but can be understood in so many different ways. And I think then you look at cognition, and then cognition is dependent on context that you grew up with, and so on. So if you're coming from different culture, different background, you will have different views. And we see that in advertising, right? So if you advertise somewhere in the Middle East, you will place it differently on the left, on the right, dependable on which way people write. So maybe there is a entire new space here to take into consideration those contexts and making presentation personalized to you to comprehend it as best as possible. So we look at a completely new level of data presentation, which is highly dependent on this contextual information. So just to maybe kind of wrap it up, it's like, what would you say, what would be the skill set required to jump into this next level of cognition as an important aspect of data analytics? Because now it's just, let's analyze the data, put up the chart. Yeah.
Excellent point, excellent question. You have to read my last book called The Age of Smart Information, where I actually describe the whole thing you just talked about, using context, our tool sets, and everything we know about being able to tell stories to get to that point. So I think that you'll find that.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank
I really
you, Mike.
appreciate the time.
I'm sure Mike will be available for questions. Thank you
course.
very much, Mike.
All right, take care. Thank you.